I recall the day when everything started to shift. Like every other Tuesday morning, it wasn't exactly like this one. I was in the kitchen attempting to prepare breakfast for our 4-year-old, Jamie, who was running around with great energy. Mark was in the dining room, most likely checking emails from work, already deeply engrossed in his phone. Mark and I met at his family's business. He was in finance, and I began off in marketing. We got along well during a work picnic. We tied the knot 2 years later. After the wedding, things changed, but I still believed it to be love. Mark's family insisted that I stay home and raise a family. It's fortunate, they said. I had no idea at the time that it was the start of my losing my identity. Mom, I'm craving pancakes. Jamie's words interrupted me while I was thinking. I said, coming right up, honey, while reversing a pancake in the skillet. The piercing, shitty sound of Mark's voice cut through the early morning air. Sarah, will it take the entire day? I have a crucial meeting coming up. Sorry, just finishing up here, I responded, attempting to maintain composure. As I arranged the dishes on the table, there appeared to be more noise than normal. Mark gave the food a cursory glance. He silently said, "This bacon is undercooked," and pushed the dish aside. Though it stung in my chest, I forced myself to drink it. With a big smile on my face, I responded, "I'll remember that for next time." Ignoring the stress, Jamie babbled on about his toy cars. I admired his naivety. As though on cue, Margaret, Mark's mother, picked that exact time to make her dramatic entry. "Sarah, my love, allow me to demonstrate the correct way to cook bacon. Crispy is Mark's favorite food." I observed her seizing control of my life, my house, and my kitchen. As the matriarch, Margaret always kept a close watch on everything. There I stood, her undertaking. "You need to cook it for a longer period of time on low heat." With a smug look on her face, Margaret remarked, "If you paid more attention, you'd know." Mark gave me a nod of assent without looking at me. "Mom is the expert," he declared. I swallowed my rejoinder and concentrated on Jamie's beaming smile while he ate his pancakes. Feeling more alone than ever, I stood there in the middle of the half-eaten breakfast and sizzling pans as they exited the kitchen, Margaret smiling contentedly and Mark engrossed to his phone. The days stretched into weeks and Mark and I got more apart. Living with a stranger was how it felt. We hardly chatted. He arrived home late and departed early. It seemed like I was talking to a wall as I attempted to close the distance. I decided to prepare his favorite spaghetti bolognese one evening. I stayed in the kitchen for hours on end, hoping something, any kind of spark, would return. I prepared the table, lighted the candles, and played music that we used to dance to. Mark didn't even realize how much work had gone into it until he got home. He simply sat into his chair and stared at his phone. He prodded at the spaghetti and inquired, "What's this?" With my voice almost audible above a whisper, I added, "I thought I'd make your favorite." He bit off and threw up. "It tastes excessively salty. Have you not tasted it?" A lump formed in my throat. I believed it to be all right. He tossed the dish aside. "I refuse to consume this. Let me get a pizza." As I cleaned the unfinished meal, my heart fell. I had the impression that I was discarding more than simply noodles. Bless his soul, Jamie attempted to lighten the situation. "Mom, may I also have pizza?" I attempted to grin for him. "Of course, sweetie," but the stillness that followed was unbearable. As I nibbled at my food, Mark consumed his pizza, his gaze fixed on the television. The distance felt like a gulf between us. The following day was the same. Mark entered the room while I was folding clothes, his face as dark as a thunderstorm. With a kick at a toy vehicle that Jamie had placed on the floor, he angrily said, "Can't you do something about all this mess?" I tried to keep up, but it may be difficult with Jamie, I said, growing impatient. "Well, give it more effort." He shot back, not even bothering to look at me. It's not rocket science to keep a house clean. I mentally counted to 10 while biting my tongue. Mark, I'm trying my hardest. He said, your best isn't good enough, and stormed inside his office, which he had taken over as a spare room. Every day it was this way. The man I married was no longer with me. He used to listen to me and make me laugh. I could hardly recognize this icy, uncaring person in his place. That night, I became aware of how alone I felt as I laid in bed and heard Mark's breathing. It seemed as though the man beside me was a million miles away. I missed our previous connection, warmth, and affection. Above all, though, I missed the guy I believed to be my spouse. And somewhere in the shadows, it occurred to me that perhaps this was the beginning of the end. When Mark was elevated to the position of CEO of the family business, things quickly changed. It seemed as though the title turned on a light bulb in him. He began returning home even later, or not at all, at times. It was like living with a monarch who didn't think his palace was nice enough while he was at home. He entered one evening with a swagger, exuding self-importance and expensive fragrance. Looking at me like I was an antiquated piece of furniture, he remarked, "Sarah, we need to talk about your appearance." It surprised me. "How do I look? How about that?" With a sigh, he seemed to be giving a youngster an explanation. "You've abandoned yourself. It is awkward. I currently lead a sizable corporation. You cannot look like this for me." My cheeks began to burn. "I'm looking after the house and Jamie. I really don't have time for a beauty regimen." He rolled his eyes. "Apologies. You could find the time if you truly cared. Become a member of a gym. Take action." I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. So now it's all about looking the part? Whatever happened to accepting me as I am? He sneered. That was before I knew I was capable of more. "Sarah, get in shape or I may have to make some adjustments." I was unable to speak. The father of my kid and the guy I had loved told me I was no longer good enough for him. He was the water in my drowning-like sensation. I tried to talk to him about it the next day, assuming that he wasn't serious and had just been in a foul mood. He was browsing through his phone in the kitchen while drinking his pricey coffee. "Mark, speaking about last night." With shaking hands, I said, "I think we need to talk." He didn't raise his gaze. "Sarah, not just now. I'm attending a meeting. However, this is crucial." "You wounded me," I urged. When he did glance at me, his eyes were icy. I expressed what had to be expressed. "Not me, but you are the one who has to change." A tear started to roll down my face. "You loved me exactly the way I was once." He gave a snort. That was before to my self-realization. "You ought to as well." I felt like a part of my heart had broken as I walked away. My husband was no longer with me. This stranger who made me feel tiny and unworthy took his seat and judged me. I became aware of my options as I laid in bed that evening and took in the quiet of the house. I either remain and wither beneath his disdain, or I could go and attempt to rediscover who I was. Though it was a terrible concept, I felt a glimmer of optimism for the first time in a long time. I could be strong enough to start over, maybe, just maybe. I was fully aware how ignored I felt during one of those really formal family dinners. The setting of the dinner table was magazine perfect, but the mood was everything from cozy. Robert, Mark's father, and Mark were deep in conversation about the family company. I just sat there, a mute witness, as if no one else noticed me. "The quarterly reports require careful consideration," Robert said, his voice hard and businesslike. "Sales must pick up." Mark answered right away. "We may even consider entering new international markets as part of our marketing expansion." When I heard this, I had to say something. When I was only a housewife, marketing was my domain and my passion. "Have you given digital marketing any thought?" With some hesitation, I said, "Social media platforms might be a terrific method to extend your audience." A pause, the type that lasts just long enough to get awkward, occurred. Then Robert started laughing, which disappointed me. "Social media. Assume that, Sarah. Your desire to assist is sweet, but shall we just let the business talk to ourselves?" Mark laughed in a condescending way and joined in. Sarah, stick to what you do well. Let us take care of the business. I blushed with humiliation and rage. My experience is in marketing. My criticisms are well-founded. I shot back, becoming slightly angrier. Robert waved his hand at me, dismissing me. My darling, it was years ago. You're not in the know. These days, you have other obligations. The remainder of the supper passed in a whirl of rage and embarrassment. Their remarks hurt because they disregarded not only my opinions, but also who I am. I was more than what they thought I was. Later, I visited my dad because I needed some comfort and encouragement. He was the one who always inspired me to follow my aspirations and served as my rock. Dad, they just brushed me off like I don't matter. I replied, my voice colored with rage and sadness. Dad said, his voice a mixture of worry, and I told you so. Sarah, I've always told you about Mark and his family's nature. I understand, Dad, but I didn't think it would become this terrible. They treat me like I'm invisible. I conceded, giving up. Sarah, you're not a ghost. You're capable and intelligent. Keep your dignity intact, he said, his voice stern. Dad, I feel stuck though. I felt hopeless as I said, I don't know what to do. My dad startled me at that point. What if we make a few slight adjustments? I have some money stashed away from some profitable ventures. What if I invested in Mark's family business with shares? I looked at him, thinking that I had misheard. You're kidding, surely. No, I'm not kidding. It's about time someone let them know you're not to be taken lightly. Despite the circumstances, I laughed. It was ludicrous, yet somehow rewarding, to think of my dad, the outsider, becoming involved in their valuable family company. One typical Tuesday, my life as I knew it came crumbling down. I dismissed my prolonged sense of being unwell as being caused by stress or exhaustion. I was able to ignore it for a while until I discovered a lump. The doctor's appointment wasn't what it seemed like it would be. The words struck me like a ton of bricks as I sat in the antiseptic doctor's office. Sarah, I apologize, but this is breast cancer. You must get therapy right now even if we discovered it early. Numb, I sat there. Cancer. Me. It is not possible. But by the look on the doctor's grey face, I knew it was all too genuine. I have a family and a son. What choices do I have? Even to me, my voice seemed far away. The doctor softly stated, we'll talk about treatment plans, but it's important we start soon. In a trance, I strolled home. How can I inform Mark? How can I inform Jamie? I was terrified and unsure about everything. When I arrived home, Mark was as usual engrossed to his laptop in the living room. I said, hardly raising my voice above a whisper, Mark, we need to talk. He looked up, irritated. Sarah, what now? I'm busy, can't you see that? I inhaled deeply. It's severe. Today, I visited the doctor. My breast cancer is real. There was stillness for a little. Then he said something that I will always remember. Cancer? Excellent, more drama. Just what I needed. I looked at him, hurt and incredulity at odds inside of me. Mark, did you hear me say that? My illness is cancer. With a groan, he snapped the lid off his laptop. Yes, I did hear you. What does this mean, then? More trips to the doctor. How will this impact the business and me? I was unable to speak. How could he be that apathetic? It indicates that I require medical attention, Mark. I require assistance. Rating about the room, he got up. Well, you best solve it right away. You cannot neglect Jamie's needs and you're cleaning at the same time. I thought I was in a bad dream. Is that all that matters to you? The home, the job, how about myself? He paused and stared at me as if I were an issue that needed to be fixed. It's not that I don't care, Sarah, but you have to realize that the timing is awful. We need to manage our business. The remainder of the talk flew by. His remarks resembled daggers, piercing more deeply with each one. In this, I was genuinely alone. The weeks that followed were filled with treatments, appointments, and extreme exhaustion. It was too much for me to keep up with Jamie and the house. Mark could take no more. I was too tired to prepare one evening after a particularly taxing therapy. "Can we place an order for tonight, Mark? I simply can't handle it." He sneered. "Place another order. How come I keep you around if you can't even prepare a basic meal?" It was a devastating blow to my heart as much as my body. My operation day was hanging over me like a threatening cloud. Not only was I afraid of the operation itself, but I was also afraid of what life would be like following. Would I feel like a different lady when I woke up? My physique had turned from being something I was proud of. It was unexpected for Mark to grasp my hand and reassure me that everything will be well. Those were long ago times. However, I had hoped for some sort of assistance. Rather, what I received was apathy. Mark was busy getting ready for work while I was getting ready for the hospital. "I assume you'll be all right." He didn't even look at me as he continued. "The physicians know what they're doing." "Yeah, I suppose," I said, attempting to maintain my composure. His hand was on the doorknob as he hesitated. "Tell me when it's finished. I have a crucial meeting coming up. Not to be missed." A lump started to grow in my throat. "Yes, I'll give a call." The procedure was a haze, but the worst part was waking up. Where a part of me once been, I sensed a vacuum. When I opened my eyes, my parents' faces were there, their love and worry inscribed on them. "Dad, Mom." With tears running down my cheeks, I mumbled, "My dear, we are here." Mom remarked, "We're here," and she took my hand. Neither that day nor the following, Mark failed to appear. He never made a call. It was as though my disease and my operation were just small annoyances that were best left unseen. My recuperation was a drawn-out process, but in the end, I was permitted to return home. Not knowing what to anticipate from Mark, I feared it. I was shocked when I got home. It wasn't just Mark. In my living room stood a young woman who looked to be in her late 20s. She touched his arm in a way that was familiar and laughed at something he said. I received the impression that I had entered someone else's world. "Mark, what's happening?" I sounded hoarse, still debilitated by the operation. Startled, he raised his head. Then his face became stern. "Sarah, come talk with me in the kitchen." He seemed abrupt and distant in the kitchen. "Divorce is what I want. I've had another encounter. You're not the spouse I was married to." Nude, I stood there. The ache in my chest was far worse than the discomfort I had after my operation. Divorce. As a result of her. Owing to this. My voice increasing, I stroked the bandage on my chest. "It goes beyond that. You've evolved. Always so depressed and so naive. I need someone living and energetic, not this." He gave me a contemptuous gesture. I was hearing things that I couldn't believe. "Mark, I have cancer. I underwent surgery. What were your expectations?" He gave a shrug. "This isn't it, I'm not sure. I've moved on. You ought to as well." The divorce papers he gave me were still warm from the printer. "Leave the house, please. It's a good thing." I turned to face him and saw how unfamiliar he had grown. "Where should I go now?" "That is not an issue for me. Work things out." My hands trembling, I packed a suitcase. Luckily, Jamie was not affected by this nightmare when he was at my parents'. I turned to gaze behind me at the home, my life, and the guy I had loved. All of it was gone, to be replaced by a hard, cold reality. I was a shell of the person I had been before I moved in with my parents after the divorce. The disease, the operation, and the betrayal all had an impact. However, something surprising occurred during those times of sorrow. I was drinking a cup of coffee while seated at the kitchen table with my dad. We were comfortable with each other's quiet. Dad surprised me by asking a question that broke the ice. "Sarah, do you recall that I mentioned considering purchasing stock in Mark's business?" Startled, I glanced up. "Yes, I had assumed you were kidding." With a grave expression in his eyes, he shook his head. "I wasn't. I carried it out. I currently have a sizable stake in the business." I almost knocked my cup over. "You what?" He gave a nod. "Yes, I did utilize my savings from investments." Everything is above board and lawful. Currently, I hold 80% of the shares. I was unable to speak. The fact that Dad owned a large portion of Mark's family business was enormous. It was not a real-life twist. It was the type you would anticipate in a movie. But why, Dad? While still shaking from the shock, I managed to inquire. He sipped on his coffee and responded, "Because my daughter is safe from harm. It was also a profitable investment opportunity. Despite Mark, the firm is strong." His action overwhelmed a part of me, but it also ignited a part of me that I had long since forgotten. Justice was more to my taste than retaliation. That was an unrelated tale. "Dad, how do you intend to use those shares?" My curiosity piqued, so I inquired. He smiled. "That's really up to you, Sarah. You possess both business sense and marketing expertise. You have a lot of potential with this. Me, managing the business that Mark and his family formerly owned and operated. It was ridiculous, daring, and exhilarating. However, I'm not sure if I'm up for it." I paused, uncertainty beginning to seep in. Dad put his hand on mine, his eyes kind. "You underestimate your strengths, Sarah. You've experienced both agony and relief. This could be your moment to rise above the ashes and reveal your true self to them, Sarah." Though absurd, the concept had immense impact. I had been denigrated and made to feel little and unimportant for years. However, I now had the ability to reverse it and make things different. I considered it for a few days, analyzing the advantages and disadvantages. It went beyond simple retaliation, taking charge of my life and demonstrating to myself that I was more than what Mark and his family believed of me were the main goals. At last, I decided what to do. I had intended to do that. I intended to acquire the business and turn it into my own. Although it was a terrifying idea, I felt motivated and had a feeling of purpose for the first time in a long time. "I'll do it, Dad. I'll take over the company," I declared with a calm, assured voice. Dad's eyes sparkled as he grinned. "I anticipated that you would. I'll schedule a board meeting. They ought to get to know the new majority shareholder." It was finally the day of the shareholders' meeting, the day I would finally step foot in a world I had been excluded from for so long. Taking a deep breath, I stood outside the corporate building. Mark and his father were inside waiting for the new majority shareholder to arrive, as was the board. A surprise was in store for them. I pushed open the doors and entered the boardroom feeling more confident than I have in years, dressed in my finest suit. Their expressions were so precious. "Sarah, why are you in this place?" Mark stumbled, a mixture of bewilderment and shock on his face. I felt like I had all eyes on me as I sat at the head of the table. The primary shareholder is now me. My father's money has allowed me to acquire 80% of this business. A moment of startled quiet fell. The board members then started talking in whispers. Mark's father, Robert, recovered first. "There must be a joke here somewhere," he stated in a rough tone. "Robert, this is not a joke." With a firm tone, I answered, "I'm here to make some adjustments." Mark's pallid face remained fixed on mine. "This is ridiculous, Sarah. A corporation cannot be run by you." With a little contented smile, I spoke. "You'll see that I'm more than competent. Actually, I have goals to grow the business and boost profitability, and part of those plans include updating our strategy and utilizing digital marketing, something I had previously proposed, to which many scoffed." The board members were paying close attention now. I confidently and intelligently explained my intentions. I noticed affirmative nods and a few of amazed looks. Mark came over to me with a frantic expression as the conference came to an end. "Please, Sarah, let's discuss this. We are able to resolve this." I turned to face the guy who, at my lowest point, had abandoned me, deceived me, and denigrated me. "Mark, there's nothing to discuss. You choose what to do. I've made mine now." I retreated as he extended his hand. "I apologize, Sarah. I was a novice at what I was doing. Give me a chance, please." With a determined resolution, I shook my head. "Mark, it's too late for that. I've moved on since you exposed your true nature to me." As I left the boardroom, I felt as though a burden had been lifted. From the devastated lady who left Mark's house with a bag and a broken heart, I had gone a long way. I had reclaimed my life and my destiny. The city was bathed in a warm glow as the sun descended. I paused to appreciate the beauty of a fresh start. With a smile on my lips, I said to myself, "Here's to new beginnings."
My name is Harper, and I'm a 42-year-old housewife working part-time. My husband, Keith, is 48 and works for a company. We have an 18-year-old daughter, Sophia, who is a high school student. Though Keith and I have been married for nearly 20 years, there has been a persistent tension in our home for quite some time. When Sophia was little, the three of us used to spend a lot of time together. However, since she started high school, Keith has been going out by himself more frequently. He has completely stopped participating in Sophia's school events and club activities. I am the one who has to drive Sophia to her badminton tournaments and practice matches, which are often far away. No matter how much I ask Keith for help, he always brushes me off saying, "I'm busy with work." Looking after the child is the mother's job, isn't it? Sophia, too, is astonished by her father's behavior. Other kids' fathers enthusiastically support them, but our dad doesn't seem to care. Sophia isn't particularly fond of Keith, who never helps with child rearing or housework, but always has complaints. Even when my part-time job gets busy and I come home late, Keith never prepares dinner. Instead, he complains, "What time do you think it is? I'm starving here. I work too, you know. You could at least prepare dinner." This often leads to arguments. Lately, Sophia has been helping with dinner preparations, which has been a great relief. The initial reason I started working part-time was because Keith asked me to. I had planned to start working when Sophia grew up, but Keith's habit of buying unnecessary things pushed me to start working again when Sophia was 1. Keith loves cars and constantly buys new ones, even though he doesn't have a high income. He spends money without thinking, often paying for his coworkers when they go out drinking. He comes home drunk, boasting about treating everyone. Recently, there have been fewer drinking parties, so he's not treating others as much. But he still complains about not having enough money. Keith works for a company that doesn't pay well, and his spending habits make it hard to save. I wanted to save money for Sophia's education and to buy our own house, but now we are barely getting by. Most of my part-time income goes towards payments on the luxury car Keith bought, a large hybrid minivan, which is too big for our 3-person family. He decided to buy it without considering Sophia's or my opinion. Before this minivan, we had a gas-guzzling giant SUV. I got angry several times because of its poor fuel efficiency. Keith, who never goes to the mountains or the sea, bought it because it was trendy. He said, "Now it's okay even in heavy snow," even though we live in an area where it only snows about once every 5 years. When he bought the current minivan, he said, "This time it's a hybrid, so the fuel efficiency is good. Also, a lot of people can ride in a minivan." When Sophia was in junior high school, many of the parents of the badminton club members drove minivans. Sophia and I had a conversation about it. Indeed, a minivan can accommodate many people and even allow for changing clothes. It's nice, but our car is large and the interior is cramped. My husband, Keith, occasionally checks in on my conversations with our daughter, Sophia. Recently, he bought a sports car before the SUV. "It was a childhood dream of mine," he said. "It's every man's fantasy." I asked him, "Can't you wait until Sophia grows up? This car's child seat is a pain. It's a car I can only drive now." He responded, "We don't use the child seat every day, so it's okay." He might not mind since he won't be transporting Sophia, but it was hard for me. The 2-door car was difficult to use, and the fuel economy was terrible. Sophia was still at an age where she needed a child seat, and getting in and out was a struggle. If only Keith would consult me. But he decides on his own, buying on impulse without considering the payments. I don't understand why he buys things he can't afford on his salary. In the end, I had to pay the loan with the money I earned from my part-time job. Every time my hours at the part-time job get longer, it's because of his purchases. When we bought the current minivan, Keith and I had a quarrel. "Next time we buy a car, consult us too. You can't decide on your own." He replied, "I should be the one to decide. I'm the one who drives it the most." I said, "You can decide, but at least let me know what kind of car it will be. That's all I ask." Okay, I understand. So next time, I can decide if I consult with you first. At his words, I started feeling anxious. You're not thinking of buying the next car already, are you? I asked. I don't know. I didn't say anything, did I? His answer seemed unnatural. I'm paying almost all of the loans for the car you're driving with my part-time job earnings. I can't pay any more than this. I'm also paying for the down payment, Keith retorted, looking dissatisfied. It's not a down payment. It's the money from trading in the old car. Then it's the same as what I paid. It could be, Keith conceded. About a month later, Keith brought up the topic again, looking guilty. Actually, I bought a new car. I was so stunned that I didn't even feel angry. This time it's an electric vehicle, so we don't need gasoline. With the current high gasoline prices, it's perfect. Electricity is expensive too. We don't have solar power, so are there any advantages to electric cars? It doesn't emit carbon dioxide, so it's good for the environment. I couldn't tell if he was just easily swayed by trends or simply doing what the car dealer told him. It's too much. How much did you pay for it? A loan of $750 per month. I need your part-time job earnings again. $750 a month? That's all of my part-time earnings. Do I have to work for your car? You'll be driving it too. Now that Sophia's club activities are over, I won't be using the car as much. Our daughter, a high school senior, has retired from her club activities and won't need the car anymore. I wanted to save my part-time earnings for her college education, but now my plan has been completely derailed. We need money for Sophia's college education too. Is it okay to buy such an expensive car? I asked Keith. He asked me back, are you okay? Sure enough, due to the recent incident, I started to harbor doubts about my husband. Am I really okay living with this man? I am filled with uncertainty. Keith doesn't consider Sophia's college expenses or our retirement funds at all. I want to discuss it with someone, but my parents are no longer around. I don't want to worry Sophia, so I can't talk to her. At that moment, I remembered a senior from work who got divorced a few years ago and is now single-handedly raising 2 children. Despite being my junior by a couple of years, they perform better than other employees. I'm not considering a divorce yet, but I want to consult him. The next day during lunch, I asked him to listen to my story. After hearing my situation, the senior said, I had small children and my wife didn't work, so I was able to make the decision quickly. I felt a bit better after talking, but honestly, I was still unsure. Do you think you could live with Sophia just on your part-time pay? He asked. That's impossible. I can't make ends meet unless I'm a full-time employee. I thought so. We both fell silent. However, as I confided in my senior, I felt much better after just consulting. From then on, we talked about various things, considering my future life. After a while, my husband's new car was delivered. The smell of a new car is really great, Keith said. Yeah. Why are you angry? Be happy, the new car is here. But for you. You're no fun. Fine, I'll celebrate by myself, he said, starting to drink beer. You're taking it easy, aren't you? I retorted. Say whatever you like, he replied, unusually pleased, probably from the joy of the new car. The next day, I had to work overtime and came home late. Sophia had prepared dinner, which was a great help. When I came home, my husband was again happily drinking beer. You're working late. Good job. I felt irritated at my husband, who was meddling with me. I have to work hard for your new car, don't I? Feeling annoyed, I made a sarcastic remark. Thanks for earning the extra money. It gets so bothersome. Why don't you just stop the payments? I was angry that he'd say such a thing when I was working late, but I held back from complaining and decided to really stop the payments. The next day, I withdrew all the money from the account used for the car loan. This meant the next payment wouldn't go through. I was looking forward to seeing what kind of face my husband would make. I managed to withdraw the money in time before the next due date, and a reminder notice arrived the next month. I hid the letters so my husband wouldn't find them. Of course, the reminder came again the following month and the month after, but I was able to hide it successfully each time. Around the 4th month after stopping the payments, I received a different document. It was sent by certified mail, and I thought this was the final reminder. When my husband came home, I threw the packet with a document at him. Some important document arrived for you. In a panic, Keith unwrapped the package, shouting, What the hell? You haven't been making car payments for 3 months. The letter stated that the car was to be repossessed due to repeated failure to respond to payment reminders. He would now have to give up his beloved car. But you were the one who said to stop the payments. Well, that was just something I said in the heat of the moment when I was drunk. Who would really stop payments? Keith exclaimed. I was so annoyed because you would tell me thanks for earning some pocket money while I was working so hard. Becoming more defiant, he started to say even worse things. You always complained every time I bought a car. I should be able to buy a car if I want to. I didn't complain about you buying a car. You can buy one, but you should pay for it yourself, I retorted. Struck by my blow, Keith was at a loss for words. We're going to need money for Sophia's education soon. Think about the future. I was shaking as he listened to me, and finally he snapped. If you can't listen to me, get out. We're getting a divorce. Hearing the word divorce made even me falter. Okay, I'll leave. Let's let Sophia decide what she wants to do. Before I finished speaking, Sophia emerged from her room. I'm obviously going with Mom. It's too much trouble to stay with a father who doesn't do anything. She had heard our argument and seemed to understand what was happening. Sophia, who had already prepared her luggage, surprised me. Well, I'll be leaving then. I'll come back for the rest of my stuff later. I grabbed only the essentials and left the house. Hey, where are you going? Keith's voice suddenly took on a sad tone. Turning back, I said, we'll properly discuss the divorce process later. I don't mean alimony, but you have to pay child support. We left the house, leaving Keith with his tearful face. Mom, you were so cool, just as expected. But what are we going to do now? Don't worry, I had prepared for this, thinking it might happen. I had expected this to happen ever since Keith told me to stop paying the car loan. Also, I had about $3,000 from not paying the car loan payments for 4 months. We stayed in a motel for about 3 days, but I had already arranged for an apartment. We were able to move to the apartment on the 4th day after leaving the house. I'm sorry for making you live in a place like a motel. I wouldn't want to live there forever, but it was actually fun because we already had a place to move to, Sophia said cheerfully, which relieved me a little. It's going to be just the two of us from now on, but I'll do my best. I'll help with everything too. Let's do our best together. We had to go back to our old house to get the rest of our stuff. We also had to finalize the divorce. I contacted Keith before returning to the old house. I asked a lawyer who was recommended by a senior at work to accompany us because I was afraid that Keith might become violent if it was just Sophia and me. The lawyer was an expert in divorce cases and had helped the senior during his divorce. It was expensive, but we could afford it. When we arrived, even the appearance of a lawyer surprised Keith, who said, "You're really okay with getting a divorce? I won't forgive you if you come back and apologize later." He glared at me as he threatened me. It's okay. I won't say such things. Even if you are working part-time, leave this place. You won't be able to make a living. You don't have to worry about me. Just sign the divorce papers quickly. Fine, I'll sign it. Just shut up. I will take full child support considering your income. Looking at the child support calculation, Keith started shouting. Why the hell do I have to pay child support? I won't pay a single penny to a daughter who wants to leave home. Being told this, I felt grateful for having a lawyer. The lawyer convinced Keith that child support is not paid to me but given to our daughter as a duty of a father. But there's still a chance that Keith won't pay the child support. Therefore, arrangements were made to deduct it from his salary if he doesn't pay. If you're just a part-timer, but you've got a lawyer, how prestigious. Where did you get that money? I forgot to tell you, I was made a full-time employee. I'm making about double my old salary, so don't worry. Keith seemed speechless. Honestly, becoming a full-time employee gave me the courage to finally get a divorce. And as a full-time employee, I could also get a housing allowance, so I could afford to rent an apartment. Due to advice from my senior colleague, I had been looking for an apartment I could move into immediately. The decision to bring a lawyer to the discussions was also advice from my senior. And sure enough, the child support from Keith stopped coming in almost immediately. It was good to have a lawyer come with me and set up the procedure to deduct it from his salary. Despite all the chaos, Sophie was able to get into her first choice university. I have to work even harder for her tuition. Working for a car loan that I don't even use is different. This has a sense of purpose. From now on, for Sophia's sake, I plan to live happily together. At a banquet, my husband Stephen and my in-laws were ignoring me for some reason. The rest of the relatives reacted the same way. Feeling suspicious, I pretended to go to the restroom and secretly observed everyone from behind a cover. Then, I overheard a horrifying conversation. A barren daughter-in-law is an ominous presence itself. That's right, talking to such ominous people might curse us too. It's better not to deal with her. Hearing these words, I was so angry that my body started shaking. It was unforgivable to be blamed for infertility and moreover to be ignored as if I didn't exist. It seemed there was no choice but to carry out my plan right away. After slipping away from the venue secretly, my phone vibrated. It was Stephen on the call. "Hey, what have you done?" Stephen yelled in agony. I chuckled. "What are you panicking for? It's the truth, isn't it?" It seemed that an image I showed on the screen had driven Stephen into a frenzy, but the real counterattack starts now. I'm going to show him hell. My name is Melissa, and I'm 35 years old. 9 years ago, at the age of 26, I married Stephen. We met at a party. Stephen, 2 years older than me, was very kind, and we clicked immediately. As we started dating and thought about marriage, Stephen told me he intended to return to his hometown in the countryside to farm. The village, close to being a ghost town due to a declining population, felt a crisis of becoming desolate. I was surprised but eventually decided to follow Stephen's passionate request to join him. I too came from the countryside, albeit a different one. I had grown tired of living in an unfamiliar city. Luckily, my brother and his wife lived in my parents' house. Knowing that there was no need to take care of my parents later also pushed my decision. After that, things moved swiftly, and we got married. I quit my job and moved to this tiny village, Stephen's hometown. Though it's called a village, most of it consisted of Stephen's relatives. We lived in a large house originally inhabited by my in-laws, who then moved to a small annex on the next plot. They were cheerful and caring, always looking out for us. Farming was tough, but living surrounded by nature wasn't bad. Above all, the people of this village were kind. When I mentioned this, Stephen happily said, "It's all thanks to the Guardian." The Guardian is a statue located in the village square. Not only in the square, but similar statues were scattered throughout the village. Some homes even had stuffed toys modeled after the Guardian. This village had its unique traditions. Everyone revered the Guardian as a literal guardian deity. According to Stephen, the Guardian never overlooked evil deeds and never forgave the wicked. That's why all the villagers were good people. Such legends are probably found in any old village. Thinking about this, I didn't dwell on it much. Life was peaceful, and I had completely forgotten about such things. But a nightmare was surely approaching. A few years after moving in, I had become accustomed to farming. Waking up early and quickly harvesting vegetables was my daily routine. Every day was unremarkable, but one thing bothered me. We still hadn't had any children. I was about to turn 30. I had always thought it would happen naturally, but recently I started to feel anxious. This was because, after a few years, more people began asking, "Don't you have kids yet?" Each time, I cheerfully responded, "It's a blessing." But it's typical of an old farming village to bluntly ask such delicate questions. Everyone asked the same, even my in-laws, and occasionally, an old man or woman passing by asked bluntly, "Why can't you have them?" I responded appropriately, but it gradually became annoying. One day, after a break in harvesting, I was called by my mother-in-law while drinking water. "Hey Melissa, how are you managing your marital relations?" Caught off guard by such an absurd question, I nearly spit out my water. "It's strange that you haven't had children for so many years. Aren't you satisfying, Stephen?" An unimaginable statement came from my mother-in-law, and I was dumbfounded. In a panic, I said, "What are you talking about? Please stop. That's not something people normally discuss," and abruptly ended the conversation. Yet, my mother-in-law continued, "It's important, you know." But I ignored her and stormed out of the room. I thought this village had old-fashioned values, but this is just ridiculous. It's creepy that they boldly ask about marital life. Having left the house, I decided to kill some time by walking to the square. Then, I saw someone. Could it be a neighbor? I tensed up for a moment. I was worried they might start talking about children again. But when I saw her face, I was relieved. It was Emily, a woman who lives nearby. Emily smiled shyly. I smiled back. Emily is the only person in the village who doesn't make rude remarks to me. She's about 10 years younger than me, so she must be around 20 now. Emily isn't originally from this village. After her parents died in an accident, she was taken in by her distant relative, an old lady in this village. This happened just before I came to the village. After graduating from a high school nearby, she now helps out with her grandmother's orchard. We occasionally pass each other on the street, but she's quiet and not very talkative, so we don't really converse much. She doesn't hang out with anyone, so the villagers call her an oddball. I used to think Emily was a bit dull because she didn't interact much, but now I appreciate that she doesn't ask intrusive questions. I felt a bit cleansed thanks to Emily after the unpleasant experience with my mother-in-law. However, that didn't solve the problem. My mother-in-law, father-in-law, and other distant relatives in the neighborhood kept saying similar things. You need to be more assertive with your husband. You need to take the lead. They would say anything they wanted. My mother-in-law then said something that gave me chills. Last night's dinner was all vegetables. You should add more meat. Maybe adding garlic would boost Steven's vitality. Why does she even know what we had for dinner last night? It's too nosy. Fed up, I decided to talk to Steven about everything. I can't take it anymore. Everyone keeps asking about when we're going to have kids. Your mom also pressed too much into our marital life. Steven, who was watching TV, responded without taking his eyes off the screen. What are you talking about? Mom and everyone else are just worried about you. Worried? That's prying. Doesn't she say anything to you? Why will they say anything to me? Infertility is a woman's responsibility, isn't it? Steven casually said something unbelievable, and I was shocked that he had such outdated knowledge. I was appalled. It's not always the woman's fault. Sometimes it's a compatibility issue, or it could even be the man's fault. Me? No way. Steven looked genuinely puzzled. I understood the elderly in the village having old values, but I was surprised that even Steven, who was relatively young, thought this way. Anyway, I want a child too. I'm thinking about getting fertility treatment. We need to find the cause before we can address it. I suggested to Steven that we go to a doctor together. But as expected, Steven was reluctant and made excuses. Why should a man go to such a place? He complained. But I managed to persuade him to agree on the condition that we go to a hospital a bit far from the village. Later, we went to a hospital in another city and both got tested. A few weeks later, when we returned to the hospital, the doctor told us a fact. There's no issue with you, Melissa. The problem is with your husband. He does not produce sperm. He has azoospermia. The moment Steven heard this, he exploded. What? It can't be my fault. Are you kidding me? Steven suddenly stood up and started yelling. I had never seen Steven like this before. The doctor, with a troubled look, showed us the test results on paper. Staring at the paper, Steven fell silent with a terrible expression. He must have been shocked. I felt sorry for him and couldn't say anything. That night, I spoke to Steven kindly. The doctor said if we do more detailed tests, we might find the cause and get treatment. It's a bit far, but I'll help. But Steven just looked down and didn't reply. He probably never imagined that he could be the cause. Feeling sorry for him, I couldn't say anything more and silently left the room. But soon, I realized that feeling sympathy was a mistake. Steven's attitude began to worsen. The cruel truth of his azoospermia seemed to have shredded his pride as a man. Perhaps in an effort to regain his shattered self-esteem, he became unusually aggressive. I was the main target of his frustrations. He criticized me for being slow at farm work, for the food not being tasty enough, and he started picking fights over trivial things, growing angrier more frequently. Initially, I remained silent, thinking he just couldn't accept the test results, feeling sorry for him. But as it continued, I too began to lose my patience. Our arguments increased, turning our home into a constant battleground. Naturally, there was no intimacy, so having children was out of the question. Going to the hospital for treatment was absolutely out of the question. Moreover, the villagers still believed my infertility was to blame. The situation where I was the only one criticized remained unchanged. I wanted to tell Steven's parents the truth, but Steven glared at me with icy eyes, warning, "Don't tell anyone." The thought of what might happen if I spoke up was frightening, and I didn't have the courage to do it. Besides, I wasn't even sure if they would believe me. After all, everyone's thinking was outdated. The conventional belief that infertility is a woman's fault prevailed. That's probably why Steven had reacted so violently when he was pointed out as the cause. As this life continued, I started to feel I couldn't bear it anymore. I understood he was shocked, but this was outright displacement of blame, and I felt like a punching bag. Maybe it would be better to separate. I was beginning to think that way. Half a year passed, and Stephen's snide remarks continued. By then, I had reached my limit. I had firmly decided to get a divorce. However, the problem was the old-fashioned mindset of the village. Divorce was seen as disgraceful. I had heard rumors of a woman who suggested divorce being verbally abused by her husband. Considering this, it was unlikely I would get easy consent. So I thought about leaving the signed divorce papers and fleeing the village. It was a drastic measure, but I was driven to it. I began to prepare secretly so that Stephen wouldn't notice. Then, the next month, Stephen was supposed to be out of the village for the day delivering crops. It was the perfect opportunity. But while I was packing my bags, the front door opened. There stood Stephen, who was supposed to be out. His eyes were furious as he shouted, "Where are you going?" When I remained silent, Stephen glanced at the divorce papers on the desk. "You were going to divorce me. Are you kidding me? If people find out my wife ran away, it would be a disgrace. Don't you dare embarrass me." It was the reaction I had expected. After a tirade of abuse, he threatened, "If you ever think about running away again, you know what will happen," and glared at me sharply. My plan had failed. I was desperate. Yet how had he found out? I had been careful to act discreetly. From then on, Stephen's treatment of me worsened. He complained that the cleaning wasn't thorough, that just seeing my face irritated him. Any backtalk from me would lead to serious trouble. "You are the worst kind of woman, running away from her husband. The guardian sees everything. Your misdeeds will be exposed." That became Stephen's mantra. Lately, even the mention of the guardian by the villagers started to disgust me. I had thought it was just superstition. But could that statue really be watching me? It's hard to believe that those trying to escape the village receive punishment, but the fact that my whereabouts and actions were precisely guessed was indeed true. I had become utterly frightened. Gradually, a sense of resignation began to grow within me. As time passed, I was about to turn 35. One day, Emily, who lives nearby, came to visit. "It's rare to see you. What's up?" Over time, Emily and I had started to talk a bit whenever we met. Unlike the other villagers who thrived on rumors and judged harshly, Emily never pried into my life and always treated me with unchanged kindness, the only woman who did so. "Melissa, there's something I really need to say." I was taken aback by the seriousness on Emily's face. I invited her inside and made some coffee. Then Emily looked around nervously and gestured for me to come closer without saying a word. We entered a room that was now used as a storage room and seldom entered. What's going on?" As I followed her in, confused, I asked her this question, and she murmured as if relieved, "We should be safe here." Then she began to pour out her words as if a dam had burst. "I can't take it anymore. This village actually..." That's when she told me a shocking fact. It was about the true nature of this terrifying village. Months later, Emily and I had met secretly several times. After learning the truth about the village, we had been trying to figure out a way to escape. The truth Emily shared was shocking. Hearing such things only made me more eager to escape as soon as possible. But we needed to act carefully. If our plan was discovered, it would be over. It took time, but finally, the day to act was set. This Sunday, a banquet related to the guardian held once every few years would gather all the village relatives. We couldn't miss this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Emily and I had discussed and done what needed to be done. Everything was prepared. All that was left was to put our plan into action. The gathering was at night. The venue was the village's only restaurant. Although the building was old, it had enough capacity to accommodate most of the villagers. Like years ago, I went there in the afternoon to help, as I had helped before. My in-laws were there, so I greeted them with, "Good morning." However, after a brief glance at me, they quickly disappeared somewhere. Maybe they were busy. Thinking so, I decided to help with preparing the food. But not just my in-laws. The other relatives too were unresponsive to anything I asked. In fact, to be honest, they were ignoring me. Had I done something wrong? Confused, time passed, and it became night. Soon, the relatives and other villagers began to arrive. Stephen was among them. But his attitude was the same. For some reason, he ignored me. It felt like I had become a ghost. Without understanding why, only anxiety and irritation grew within me. So I pretended to go to the restroom to secretly listen to their conversations. Then a terrifying conversation hit my ears. Melissa never did have children, did she? At her age, it's probably impossible now. Oh dear, an infertile daughter-in-law is just bad luck. She must be cursed by the guardian. My mother-in-law began with a tone of disgust, and a clearly drunk Stephen nodded in agreement. Yeah, talking to such an unlucky person might curse us too. It's better for everyone not to deal with her. Of course, I made sure to inform the villagers last night. I told them that speaking to Melissa would bring the guardian curse. My father-in-law added with a laugh. Hearing their words, I began to shake with anger. Unforgivable. It wasn't my fault I couldn't have children, and to think to be deemed an ominous presence, to be ignored on top of that. Is this what adults do? No matter how you look at it, this village is wrong. We should carry out our plan immediately. We intended to flee this village, but that alone wasn't enough to settle my feelings. I had to somehow strike back at them. I was resolved. Soon, Emily appeared from the venue. The timing was perfect. Without saying a word, Emily and I nodded to each other. Then I turned off the lights at the venue. Suddenly, it was dark, and voices could be heard asking, "What happened? Is it a power outage?" Amidst the confusion, Emily tampered with a computer that was placed in a corner of the venue. Originally, there was a computer, projector, and screen set up for today's event to reflect on the guardian and the history of the village. We decided to use that setup. After a while, a certain image appeared on the screen. "What is this?" Stephen screamed. My in-laws, other relatives, and villagers were also staring at the screen, causing a commotion. "Who did this? Melissa, where are you?" Stephen became frantic and started causing a scene. Emily and I decided to retreat for the moment. We discreetly left the venue and met outside. About 3 minutes had passed since we escaped when my phone began to vibrate repeatedly. It was Stephen, calling relentlessly. "Melissa, what have you done?" He screamed in agony as soon as I answered. I chuckled. "What are you panicking for? It's the truth, isn't it?" It seemed like everyone was under the wrong impression, so I just wanted to set the record straight. The image projected was the result of a medical examination from years ago. It was a diagnosis that confirmed Stephen's azoospermia. The large text displayed on the big screen was enough to astonish everyone present at the venue. Stephen, having his closely guarded secret exposed, was in a state of panic. He seemed extremely confused and kept shouting incoherently. He was making so much noise that I quickly hung up the phone. My phone kept vibrating afterward, but of course I ignored it. Emily looked at me with concern. "Is everything okay?" "Just as I expected, but we need to push a little more." The harm I had suffered wasn't something I could just let go of. Emily and I returned to the banquet hall together. Peeking into the venue, it had turned into a scene of utter chaos. "Is this really true? You were infertile, Stephen." "It can't be." Everyone was confronting Stephen. His face turned pale as he kept saying, "This is a lie. It's a conspiracy by Melissa," sweating profusely as he made excuses. The villagers had believed that our inability to have children was my fault, the woman's fault. But the truth was different. At the time of the examination, there was nothing about me that could cause infertility. It was Stephen's azoospermia that had prevented us from having children. Yet, without being able to tell the truth, I was blamed. I was reproached as if not having children was a sin, and my existence was ignored. The numerous verbal abuses and the painful days I had to endure were not something I could forgive. Emily and I entered the buzzing venue. "Melissa, what are you doing?" Stephen shouted at me. "Don't mess with me. Doing something like this, you'll be cursed by the guardian. You'll face terrible consequences." At his words, I snapped. "What guardian? You were just spying with security cameras." How creepy. As I said this, the room fell silent. Hitting the nail on the head, Stephen, my in-laws, and the villagers turned pale. Yes, the guardian was not a protective deity. In fact, surveillance cameras were installed inside the guardian. Cameras were hidden not only inside the stone statues around the village, but also inside the stuffed toys of the guardian that were displayed in our living rooms. These were monitored by board elders in a room at the community center who watched the actions of outsiders. That's why my attempts to escape were well known. I had learned this from Emily on that day about 10 years ago, around the time Emily was taken in by an elderly woman in the village after losing her parents. Lonely, Emily had once secretly followed her grandmother to work because she missed her. Her grandmother went to the community center. There, she and the elders laughed and chatted while watching the villagers through surveillance cameras. At that moment, Emily learned about the village's secret legacy of the Guardian cameras. Shocked, Emily somewhat understood the village atmosphere. The rumors spread so quickly. This was it. It was bad enough to be the subject of idle gossip, but being watched while walking down the street or even inside the house was too much. Emily despised the village's tendency to invade others' privacy. Emily tried to stay out of the gossip, so the villagers started calling her odd for not joining their circle. She was fed up with the village, but she had no relatives and nowhere else to go. She had no choice but to endure life there. But one day, as her 25th birthday approached, her grandmother began pressuring her to go on arranged dates. "You need to have children soon, or you'll end up infertile like Melissa," she was told, and persistently pushed to marry an elderly widower living on the edge of the village. Naturally, Emily refused such an unreasonable demand. However, her grandmother began to threaten her, saying that such defiance would bring the curse of the guardian upon her. When Emily could no longer bear it, she thought of me, hoping I could help. Knowing the tragic experiences I had faced due to gossip, she approached me to escape the village together. The reason Emily had moved from the living room to another room that day without speaking was because she had spotted a guardian plushie there. I hadn't paid any attention. I thought it was just another plushie common around the village, but there was a camera hidden inside it. It was likely installed by Steven to monitor my activities. That explained why my every move seemed to be known when I tried to escape, and even when my mother-in-law accurately guessed what we had for dinner, because they were watching through the camera. It was obvious to them. I felt a chill at the sheer horror of it. My instincts told me it was dangerous to stay in this village. Taking up Emily's suggestion, we decided we must escape the village as soon as possible. We planned together, but was escaping enough? I felt I couldn't rest without avenging the years of mistreatment. I thought about it. First, I had to clear my own name. And then, "Emily, did you talk, traitor?" her foster grandmother yelled furiously. But Emily glared back at her. "I appreciate that you took me in when I had no one, but I can't stand living like this, sneaking around, peeking into other people's lives, living off gossip and backstabbing. I absolutely hate it." "How could you say that?" The grandmother and the other villagers began to make a commotion. To silence them, I decided to deliver the final blow. I manipulated the computer and displayed new images on the screen. The images that appeared one after another shocked everyone. Stephen was flirting with a young woman in the village. My mother-in-law secretly added the juice of a dirty rat to the coffee she served at village meetings. My father-in-law put his hands around the shoulders and waist of a married woman. Emily's grandmother was stealing vegetables from someone's garden. Almost all the villagers were caught in embarrassing acts they wouldn't want to be known. Everyone at the venue was speechless. Stephen exclaimed, "When did you take these pictures? How is it possible to capture such compromising photos of everyone?" Emily explained, "It was impossible that all the villagers were good people. Knowing where the cameras were, they would have acted in the blind spots if they had anything to hide. We focused on the blind spots, places that were out of sight of the guardian statues and plushies, and identified the most convenient spots for misdeeds to occur, where we planted our own small cameras purchased online. Then the village scandals just kept coming out. The villagers were naturally committing minor wrongs in places they thought were not covered by cameras. They had claimed all along that all the villagers were good people. It was truly laughable. We captured crucial moments from the camera footage and saved them, and now we expose those images in broad daylight. An eye for an eye. Since my privacy was violated, I did the same to them. This should teach them how deplorable it is to indulge in spreading rumors about others." The villagers fell silent in shame. "What do you mean all villagers are good people? Just a bunch of scum. You enjoy spying on outsiders and having a laugh. Give me a break. I don't want to stay in this outdated, privacy-less village for one more second." I shouted loudly and thrust the divorce papers in front of Stephen. Caught off guard, Stephen stood frozen, mouth agape. My in-laws and villagers were also stunned. They probably never thought I would fight back. Indeed, there was a time when I almost gave up, but now with Emily as my ally, Finding a way out, I could no longer just sit back and take it. I looked down quietly at them, stunned. "Goodbye, pitiful everyone," echoed Emily, her gaze full of contempt for the villagers. We left the banquet hall without looking back. Once outside, we picked up 2 suitcases that we had hidden in the barn. These contained all the essentials we needed for our new lives. The divorce papers were already left at the house, and now with these suitcases, all we had to do was walk out of the village. However, as we were leaving, I suddenly stopped in my tracks. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, puzzled. "I just have to do this," I said, grabbing a hoe that was leaning against a farmhouse. I headed to the square and swung the hoe with all my might. A tremendous noise erupted as the statue of the guardian was spectacularly destroyed. Of course, the surveillance camera inside it shattered into pieces as well. "That was quite spectacular, Melissa. There's no point in leaving that thing intact." That felt refreshing. We laughed together. Then we destroyed every single small guardian statue throughout the village. Naturally, we had already thrown away any related plushies inside the house. It's incredible to think how frightening this setup was. The guardian statues were originally created long ago to scare misbehaving children. "The guardian will scold you if you do something bad" was an effective piece of education back then. But as times changed, this method of teaching young children evolved into a tool for punishing anyone the villagers disliked. It mainly targeted people like me who came from outside the village and those like Emily who did not try to blend in. Initially, it was just a way for people to gather and nitpick on those who did not conform to village norms. It probably started as just a bit of idle gossip to pass the time. However, over time, this gossip evolved into a network of surveillance cameras, ensuring constant monitoring in this closed-off village. The absurd superstition of the guardian became a normalized justification for spying on others. Not only is it problematic to expose people's privacy, but the persistence in outdated thinking is equally troubling. The negative energy filling this warped village eventually seemed to corrode the hearts of its residents more than any curse or retribution. I have come to find human actions far more frightening. I refuse to stay in such a place any longer. We left the backward, rotten village behind without a backward glance. Later, I heard through the grapevine that infighting had begun among the villagers after I exposed their wrongdoings. Following ugly disputes, the villagers split up, and communication completely broke down, impacting even their farming activities. Lack of coordination led to frequent mistakes, and blame shifting began. Naturally, the quality of vegetables deteriorated, and the agricultural cooperative started to complain. The village could no longer sell its produce. As a result, almost everyone fell into poverty. As for Stephen, he managed to get divorced. Worried that he wouldn't file the divorce papers I had left at home, I consulted a lawyer after leaving the village. The lawyer intervened, and it turned out Stephen did fill out and submit the divorce papers. He apparently remarried quickly because he wanted to be with the woman he had an affair with, who lived on the outskirts of the village. But with the village facing a food shortage, Stephen's household was also struggling to make ends meet. The woman he remarried eventually left him. My in-laws were also out of money and spent their days in constant quarrels. No matter how miserable they became, I could not muster any sympathy for them. I never want to have anything to do with them again, nor do I wish to remember them. As for Emily and me, we are now living peacefully in a new place. However, the journey here was not easy. Emily had no relatives, and at my parents' home, my brother and his wife were living, so I couldn't impose on them. After leaving the village, we had no one to rely on. That's why we had already started looking for jobs in secret before we left. Because of the surveillance cameras, we couldn't move around too openly. We planned our meetings in a camera-free storage shed and arranged everything via computer. This took some time, but after several online interviews, I finally found a job. My experience in clerical work before I got married came in handy. I was hired as a temporary employee, which was fine by me. We had also found a small place to live. No matter how cramped, it was far better than the village environment. Since Emily had no experience outside of farm work and was struggling to find a job, she decided to live with me in my place while looking for work. Soon after we left the village, Emily secured a job. Fortunately, being in her 20s and willing to start in an entry-level position helped despite her lack of experience. Eventually, my hard work was recognized, and I was promoted to a permanent employee. My salary increased, and I was able to move from a small place to a condo. Subsequently, Emily became independent and moved into a nearby condo. Now, we both have made friends at work and in our community, enjoying every day. Leaving the village was truly the best decision. There was a time when I lost my husband, my home, and my job, but by having the courage to start anew, I was able to reshape my life. I wish I could tell my past self not to give up. By acting with hope and not giving up, I have achieved the life I have today. The thought that my mother-in-law won't be around for much longer is a comfort. I took some paid time off to spend a night away from the house where I live with my in-laws to attend my youngest brother's wedding. As I packed my overnight bag, my mother-in-law's voice called out after me, "Why don't you just never come back? And while you're at it, why don't you get a divorce and leave?" I smiled subtly, accepting her malice, and left the house without looking back. I paused to say goodbye to our house before going too far. I appreciated everything it had done for me despite my mother-in-law's lack of attention. Carrying a somewhat large bag, I hurried to the location where my dear family awaited. The hotel would be my home for 3 days and 2 nights, and my mother-in-law had no idea I wouldn't be returning. What happens next is still a secret. I'm Selena Jason, a 48-year-old part-time employee, balancing the management of our hectic home with my office work. Dean and I have been married for over 30 years. Despite our arranged marriage, we get along well and share similar values. The only challenge in our relationship is Dean's career as a sailor, which often keeps him away for over a year at a time. We are blessed with a son, and our connection remains strong. Until recently, we lived with my in-laws, primarily caring for Dean's grandmother. I managed her care almost entirely on my own, paying a caretaker during the day. This arrangement continued until her passing. Tears filled my eyes as Dean expressed his gratitude for the attention I gave her. She spent her last years surrounded by great-grandchildren and received excellent care. Though Dean's profession keeps him away, I'm proud of his significant contributions to American logistics. After her grandmother's death, my mother-in-law's behavior changed drastically. She once tried to be kind to me while pushing all the caregiving duties onto me, but once I stopped, she began to completely disregard me. She would exclude me from outings and intentionally bump into me within the home. Her blatant hostility was unsettling. During one of Dean's absences, my son Russell mentioned, "Grandma's saying nasty things again." When Russell was only 4 or 5, my mother-in-law made up stories to convince him that my father hated me and that I was cheating on Dean, which she claimed was why Dean didn't come home. Discovering these falsehoods left me astounded. I was diligently doing domestic tasks and working hard every day, not cheating. Dean's absences were due to his job, not my actions. Convincing a child of such lies was absurd. I focused on calming a worried Russell rather than dwelling on her words. I was relieved when Dean returned and reprimanded her for her behavior. Now that Dean is back, my mother-in-law seems to be making the most of his presence by keeping me busy. Despite the caregiving being over, she insists on meticulous cleaning and gives me difficult recipes to follow. Recently, she hosted a drama marathon, inviting local ladies over, leaving a mess of drink spills and food wrappers for me to clean up. It added more work during an already hectic time before dinner. I was sweating from the cleanup, irritated by her constant demands to hurry up and make supper. She claimed to be too full from snacks, but didn't even sit at the table for dinner. Russell's complaint that my mother-in-law said she didn't like me and that I should go away only made me more irate. He suggested it might be best if we lived apart from her. After calming down Russell and preparing him for bed, I knew I needed to have a serious conversation with Dean. One day, after Russell left, I suddenly started to feel sick. I was sweating, my face was hot, and my limbs were freezing. My menopausal symptoms were especially bad on that specific day. Since last year, I've been feeling strange, and the doctors have determined that it's menopause. They were monitoring my condition without prescribing anything, but there were difficult days. I questioned if the stress from my mother-in-law's actions was affecting my health. By nightfall, I felt worse and found myself resting in my room. My mother-in-law was yelling at me to come to supper as I heard her approaching. I was having trouble simply sitting up. I thought about pretending to be asleep, but she pulled the cover off me. She clapped her hands and demanded supper, so I reluctantly sat up. Given that my grandmother-in-law used to manage the kitchen, I reasoned that if my mother-in-law wanted supper, she should prepare it herself. Lately, it had just been me in the kitchen, My mother-in-law hardly ever went in there except to set the dishes while Dean was home. Maybe she wasn't a good chef. I told her I was having trouble with menopause and couldn't do the chores today since I was so tired. Having experienced menopausal symptoms herself, I thought she would understand. Her response, though, was far from empathetic. She snorted, turned a sack over my head, and I screamed a little in the darkened room as things fell down around me. I was nauseous after waking up but wasn't sure why right away. A minute later, I discovered the fragrance surrounding me was that of potatoes. My mother-in-law had thrown snack crumbs all over me, and the bag she'd have flipped upside down was almost empty. It was so unexpected that I was taken aback. With a tongue click, she exited the room. I lay in bed, hurting, reprimanded, and drenched in crumbs. Rather than being angry, I experienced an odd, almost dreamlike feeling, as though I was seeing something peculiar. My patience was beginning to wear thin. I took a paid leave of absence from work about 6 months later to prepare for a trip to my younger brother's wedding. After living together for a few years, he was finally getting married to his girlfriend. Their house is in New York, so I made reservations for a 3-day, 2-night stay at a hotel. Despite my brother's offer to pay, I chose to handle the hotel expenses myself since I wanted to set my own hours. Although it was a modest ceremony with just relatives, I was looking forward to attending because it was a rare opportunity for everyone to be together. I planned a week's worth of meals ahead of time, figuring no one else would be cooking during my vacation. I told my in-laws about the meals I had made and put in the fridge the evening before I left. During supper, my mother-in-law appeared unhappy, but my father-in-law praised me. "What's the deal with all the fuss? It's your brother's wedding. Why even attend? Isn't this simply a remarriage? Probably nothing noteworthy," she scowled, more than just a stare. My father-in-law gave her a look. "Actually, both my brother and his partner are getting married for the first time," I corrected her. My mother-in-law seemed to be misinterpreting the situation as she laughed crudely. "A first marriage at 40 must indicate a personal issue with him. Even though your brother is young, why is he getting married in style?" "Insolent," she said. It seemed she had either forgotten my family structure or was mistaking my brother for someone else. In reality, I have 3 brothers, and my youngest brother is still very young. Considering we are separated by 14 years, my youngest brother, who is in his early 30s, is marrying a woman in her 20s. My mother-in-law was insulted by the correction when I told her this. Her next statement was even more snide, comparing the age difference between a parent and child to that of a girlfriend in her 20s. It surprised me that she wouldn't listen. My father-in-law cleared his throat as if he realized what had happened. "She's not just 20, she's in her 20s, I attempted to explain. Their ages barely differ by 4 or 5 years. That seems sensible, doesn't it?" She appeared rather reasonable when we chatted on a video conference. Lately, I wrapped up my conversation with my in-laws and got ready to head out. I made sure I had everything I needed in my bag and prepared a gorgeous attire for the wedding. From the living room, I could hear my mother-in-law speaking loudly and angrily to my father-in-law. Knowing it would be best to avoid any confrontation, I decided to leave the house as quickly as possible. Feeling a surge of anger, I rolled my somewhat overweight bag towards the front entrance. The following morning, I was briefly stopped by my mother-in-law's parting remarks. "Never come back, and why don't you just get a divorce?" "Yes, as you wish," I replied happily, sounding more composed than I had anticipated. I had long since reached my breaking point and felt more relieved than I realized. Dean had helped me prepare for this day. My mother-in-law laughed and munched on some snacks, seemingly oblivious to the circumstances. The amount of food she could consume first thing in the morning surprised me. I chose to walk to the station. As I turned to look back at the house before continuing, I thought I really owed this house a lot, except for my mother-in-law. For a very long time, Dean, Russell, my father-in-law, and my grandmother-in-law had made this house feel like home. I even felt like I owed the walls and roof. But I didn't remember ever needing my mother-in-law's assistance. I felt so silly for some reason. With somewhat excessive luggage, I hastened to meet my dear family. I was about to move into a new apartment and live alone after spending 3 days and 2 nights at a motel. I met Dean at the wedding location. He was the one we had invited, and when he saw me coming, he handed me a pen and an unsigned divorce document. We decided that signing it would be the last thing we did together as a couple. "Many thanks. Together. Let's complete it when we return to the hotel." I hope it's acceptable that I reserved a twin room, I added. My brother's marriage today is a sad event but also represents a fresh start for us. We'll disclose the divorce later and not in front of everyone today. Dean and I exchange a warm smile, both of us realizing the momentous step we were about to take. It seemed so weighty to even consider signing that one piece of paper representing the dissolution of our more than 30-year marriage. Dean comforted me, saying that being with him had always made me truly happy, so I apologized. I didn't mind that he was frequently away from home for work because I knew this from the beginning. Well, except for his mother. Apologize not. You've made a fantastic spouse, I added. Let's stay close friends moving forward. With all the affection I could muster, Dean clasped my hand in tears and thanked me once again, bringing tears to my eyes as well. I decided to blame my emotions on joy for my brother's wedding. Dean went back to his parents' house by himself the following day. He gave his in-laws an explanation of the circumstances, and at first, they were taken aback by the abrupt discussion of divorce. When they heard the whole tale, my father-in-law lost his temper. He yelled, frightening my mother-in-law. How dare you drive out someone who cared for my mother until the end? My father-in-law had been a great support and caring partner, even though I had been the one doing most of the physical labor and taking care of my grandmother-in-law. It seems that my father-in-law had secretly grumbled about my mother-in-law's lack of contribution. He went up to her and voiced his complaints. Since entering the family through marriage, you have never been good at cleaning. You gave birth to our baby, so I remained mute. However, you have taken advantage of my mother's indulgence to avoid lending a hand. Selena accomplished everything. You're nothing like her, he said. The comparison to me made him even more enraged. You ought to have been the one to depart. It is incomprehensible that we lost a devoted daughter-in-law like Selena who gave us so much. You have made no financial contribution at all. My mother-in-law's stance was undermined when money was brought up. Dean's pay covered all family costs, and she had never worked outside the home. Even though our family was wealthy, I continued to work because I enjoyed it. My income supported the family by paying for theater tickets, vacations, and special occasion fine meals. These actions were investments in getting me some alone time. Dean, it's not too late. Seeing the seriousness of the situation, my father-in-law at last advised, go apologize and ask Selena to marry you again. Despite her distress and desperation, my mother-in-law was powerless to avert the fallout from her actions. This is the home I constructed, my father-in-law furiously said. You need to leave, and he started to evict her. In a fit of rage, my mother-in-law screamed and scratched at her tangled hair. Observers found her conduct strange and disturbing. No, I'm not going anywhere. I refuse to be divorced at this age. How am I meant to live alone? She said. My father-in-law was physically stronger than her, so he ultimately succeeded in dragging her out of the house despite her struggle. He forcefully closed and locked the door, leaving her to sob loudly, clutching it. The neighbors were frightened by the disturbance and phoned the police. When the police came, my father-in-law opened the door, but his rage lingered for several days. The atmosphere in the house was tense. My father-in-law and mother-in-law avoided one another and even ran away when they saw each other in the same room. It was as though they were living apart. My father-in-law called a family gathering after his distant daughter was put in an unsustainable circumstance. He said, I'm going to divorce her, but his daughter objected, expressing compassion for my mother-in-law, which made things more difficult to talk about. Dean described the abuse I was subjected to, including the way my mother-in-law had deceived our kid to incite him against me. He talked about my menopausal pain and showed emails from our kid as proof. Having seen it all, my father-in-law voiced his dissatisfaction, saying my mother-in-law had disobeyed his advice to halt her actions and apologize. Dean also brought up how I handled home duties and my grandmother-in-law's care, asking his sister what she would think if her own mother-in-law had acted in the same way. She remained mute when asked which side she would support. Enraged, my mother-in-law bemoaned that her daughter had betrayed her and claimed to have betrayed herself. Her sardonic honesty amused me since, as I discovered, our grandmother was the one who raised us most of the time, something I had always worried about in our family. Mom used to spend a lot of time with her neighbors, chatting about her old days. His sister had looked at my mother-in-law with contempt after learning about the bullying. Ultimately, The only housewives who made a significant contribution were myself and my grandmother-in-law, whom I took care of until her death. Despite having 2 kids, my mother-in-law often shied away from cleaning and took pleasure in the advantages with little effort. Her status was undermined when the family ultimately discovered her pattern of carelessness. My mother-in-law halted her tirades, realized her situation, and started crying. Ultimately, compassion prevented a divorce, but my father-in-law is still considering it. I told my father-in-law that I would want to meet with him when I heard this. After I left, Dean told me about these incidents. He said, "Dad should have supported Selena from the beginning if he was going to get so upset now. However, I wasn't present, so what could I say?" Sipping his steaming coffee, Dean moaned. We were in our beloved cafe, a spot we have loved since we were little. I selected a soft drink, something I hadn't had in a while, whereas Dean got a coffee. I grinned softly as I heard the specifics of my mother-in-law's shameful actions. "Be kind to yourself. Your crucial work required you to be gone. You are relied upon by many," I said sincerely. It is wonderful that Dean, while being gone for years at a time, supports people via marine transportation in his capacity as a sailor. I apologize for this inconvenience, but that's why I've been putting up with it. You have my continued admiration and respect, yet I am unable to stay in your parents' household. At last I said what had been on my mind for a very long time. Though he seemed a little dejected, Dean nodded in agreement. I was relieved that he did not blindly support his parents. I couldn't help but grin widely, and Dean gave me an obviously amazed look. Dean later said that he believed my smile was brighter than it had ever been at that very time. Dean also seemed more endearing than ever to me. Dean assisted me in seeing his father the day following our cafe meeting. It was time for my last bit of retaliation. Dean's father was dressed more elegantly than usual when he showed up at the cafe. I briefly discussed the weather before getting right to the point. "Dean told me that you're thinking about divorcing your wife. It's doable while you're still well. But after all this chaos, managing it on your own will be difficult. I'm willing to assist with your latter years of care if you do decide to split." This obviously thrilled his father. Dean could spend a lot of time at sea, and his sister resided far away. He had never been one to help out around the house with cooking, cleaning, or washing, so after seeing his mother through to the end, he would definitely be grateful for my assistance. He crossed his arms and scowled, saying, "Of course I'll separate from her." No, hold on, perhaps getting a divorce would be better. I hoped my mother-in-law would be fully removed from the matter since she was quite likely to be removed. Her circumstances looked to be getting worse. If I were to suddenly pass away, she'd probably make a huge fuss, he thought. It's better to divorce her properly before that happens. Dean seemed to steel himself as his father talked with increasing determination. Once he makes up his mind, his father usually follows through on it, sometimes going a little too far, but that's just his personality. After years of cohabiting with him, I smiled and nodded in accord, knowing how to handle him. This kind of little prodding would probably get him to follow through. Dean laughed and saw what I was trying to do but didn't step in. He appeared to be much more irritated than I was by my mother-in-law's actions. Suddenly full of energy, his father sprang up to get the divorce papers. I chose to help him out of goodwill by introducing him to the attorney Dean, and I had consulted for our divorce. My mother-in-law was doomed to live a lonely existence after that day since my father-in-law aggressively pursued the divorce. After a week, I went back to my old house, which was now simply my ex-in-law's place. I went to get possessions that I had previously been unable to take. Even though I had removed most of the items, there were still clothing, books, sentimental mementos, drawings from my son's early years, bedding and furniture that I had paid for with my own money. I had gathered a lot of personal belongings in the residence over the years. I ended up seeing my mother-in-law for the last time on this visit. She was clearly in a panic, as her divorce had already been settled by that point. She knelt in front of me as I collected my possessions, her face pale, and she started apologizing. "Margaret, I sincerely apologize. I ask you please, it was a joke. Kindly return and convince your spouse," she pleaded. I ignored my mother-in-law's pleadings and kept packing. She got to her feet quickly, insulting me and going back to her old ways, furious at my lack of interest. "How can you disregard me when I'm acting so modestly? Since being a member of this family, you have only caused problems. Simply depart and pass away by yourself," she screamed. He barked and spat at me after hurling a string of less complex, unrepeatable slurs. I ignored her again and concentrated on putting my belongings in a cardboard box. She let out a sudden cry and rushed towards the box, turning it over. Startled, I ducked as she had a fit, kicking and stomping the clothing, scattering them across the floor. Enough! Dean scowled at his mother and yelled. His normally submissive nature had grown into a powerful figure, surprising his mother despite his habit of complying. I turned to my mother-in-law and held Dean back with one hand while maintaining a neutral look. I am not your daughter-in-law anymore. You are not my mother-in-law anymore. We are no longer in a relationship. I'm grateful for nothing. It was not you but your father-in-law and grandmother that assisted me. I hurried over the jumbled garments and stuffed them into the box without folding any of them. Strange, don't touch my belongings. Farewell, I said, directing a final remark at my messy mother-in-law. I hurried out of the room, ready to be away from her. I gave Dean a call to take care of the stuff that was left. I waited for my brother to go after getting into his car. My mother-in-law was still screaming inside the home, but I wasn't going to waste time listening. I heard her weep in sorrow and keep beating her own head after we departed. She appeared to regret cutting off her final hope, but there was never going to be a possibility for reconciliation. Sadly, it was too late for her regrets to be significant. My mother-in-law was ultimately forced to move out and started living alone in a small apartment about a month later. Every now and again, Dean and his sister stop over to see how she's doing. I've heard that she resides indoors most of the time, hardly takes a shower, and wears her old clothing as pajamas. She spends her days eating cheap snacks and fast food and complaining about how poor her life is. Even though she and my father-in-law divided some assets during the divorce, it wasn't much, which meant she would be financially unstable as she aged. Personally, I'm not offering any assistance. Is that not evident? Dean's mother was always proud of him because he was a well-paid sailor. It never occurred to her that her own kid might cut her off altogether. Ironically, she is now the one who is unable to return, despite having previously advised me to leave and obtain a divorce. Similar to the proverb, curses return upon those who curse, my mother-in-law ought to have been prepared to deal with her own bad luck if she cast bad luck wishes on other people. I live a quiet life with my cat in an apartment approximately 30 minutes away from my former in-law's house. 5 years after the divorce, I chose this location since it would make my commute to work easier. The rental is a nice property with plenty of sunlight and is pet-friendly. Every week, I still go see my ex-father-in-law and make him different meals. Since the divorce, our relationship seems to have improved. Considering how much I still assist, my distant sister-in-law can scarcely meet my sight. Dean and I communicate frequently. We make it a point to go on dates as soon as he gets back from his lengthy maritime travels. It's like opening a fresh chapter. Though we are relatively new to this, we like going to movies and museums, and our relationship seems new and exciting. We find it quite delightful to talk and communicate for hours on end. On his days off, Russell comes over to visit and makes jokes about our fake divorce, joking, "You two just went back to being lovers, didn't you?" However, the fact is that Dean and I never had a romantic relationship in the first place. Our marriage was planned. We seem to be developing a love relationship for the first time right now. We even have a cover agreement that says we will remarry if we are ever totally free from his mother, whether she dies, moves in with his sister, or enters a facility. Dean proposes that this would be the point at which his mother would no longer require welfare checks. Talks have already started on whether his sister and her husband would put her in a facility or begin living with her. Our get-together could not be too far off. It seems a little awkward to discuss, but after more than 30 years together, and as we approach our 50s, I'm excited about the possibility of falling in love with Dean, for whom I've always had a great deal of affection.